really focus on rebirth and renewal through release in today's lesson. Again, this is our classroom, so any spontaneous feedback, outbursts, questions are all good. Invite all that. We're going to be thinking about how we can experience rebirth and renewal through release in our own lives. Again, this is not a passive endeavor, so I invite you to begin thinking about where in your life you feel you might be stuck, whether it's in your thoughts or feelings, past relationships, resentments, beliefs. Where might you be stuck? Just allow that to sort of come to the surface of your thinking so that it can be there, at least in the background of our talk today. Where might you have clenched fists?
How long do you have, honey?
What's that?
How long do you have?
How long do you have? Hey, I'm here all week.
All week,
There you go. That's the attitude. And where might that growth potential be restricted by what we're holding on to? The past, right? Usually it's the past. It's holding us back. And where can we make space for that rebirth and renewal to happen in our lives? And maybe most importantly, why is it holding us back? Whatever that is, why are we holding ourselves back? What is it that we're clinging on to so desperately that's preventing us from experiencing rebirth and renewal every moment of every day? I want to start with a brief story about, it's a Zen story. Maybe you've heard it. I love Zen stories. But in this particular story, there are two Zen monks they've just been out for a long walk in Thailand. And on the way back to their monastery, there are torrential rains. This is September, so there's lots of rain in Thailand. And they discover on the road back to the monastery that the rain has been so heavy, there's a river just rushing across the road. Very difficult to cross. They think they can probably manage it. But as they get closer to the river, they see a woman standing there. And she's fearful of crossing the river because the water's pretty heavy. She's dressed pretty nicely and doesn't want to get her garments wet. And so one of the monks picks her up, puts her on her back, carries her carefully across the river, gets to the other side of the river and sets her down. And then the two monks continue on, and they continue their walk in silence for hours. Miles go by, and they're walking in silence. Finally, the other monk, the monk who hadn't picked up the woman, just can't keep it inside any longer. And he says to the other monk, "Why did you do that? Why did you pick that woman up and carry her on your back? You know monks aren't supposed to touch women." And the other monk says, "You're still carrying her? I put her down miles ago. I put her down hours ago." Love the enthusiasm. That sort of highlights what we do, right? Except we'd be lucky if we dealt with it maybe only hours later. We could be carrying stuff, days, weeks, months, years, decades, right? And so we can either choose to voluntarily set this stuff down, or, as can happen, it can just become such a heavy burden and eventually it crushes us, really. That's what happened to me. So I want to share a brief personal story along these lines. So the particular burden that I'm thinking about, well, I didn't even recognize it. Let's just begin with, I wake up one morning and I'm the type of person, pretty much what you're seeing now is what you get every day. It's a new day. As our song said, I'm always pretty energetic. I always wake up in high spirits. I don't really have a lot of down days. If I get down during a day, by the next morning I'm fine again. But this particular day, it's about 10 years ago, and I woke up and, you know, these things, they sneak up on you. This one snuck up on me. I just couldn't recognize myself. I felt so lost, confused, down, like the bottom had dropped out, and everything that I thought, this carefully constructed life I thought I had built that would, you know, it's sort of like the Three Little Pigs. I had built my house just right to withstand any storm. And all of a sudden, I just collapsed internally. And I was getting ready for work early in the morning, and my husband Dennis, who's sitting in the back, was still half asleep, and I was in our closet, and I said through the open door, I said, I think I broke something in myself and I can't seem to fix it. And that's how it felt, because I was used to fixing things, you know, I always kind of got stuff together, and I couldn't fix it. That's how it felt. And then I went out to the kitchen and to prepare some oatmeal for breakfast. And I said, well, I started the water, got it boiling for the oatmeal, and then for some reason, not really sure exactly why this was a thing, but I put my iPhone in the boiling water. Somehow that iPhone represented, like, I don't know, everything that was wrong in my life. I don't know exactly what it represented, but I put the phone in the water, and then I just started screaming. You know, our son Alex is sleeping in his room not too far down the hall, and I'm screaming, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done. And I wanted to be done. And I couldn't put my finger on it because I didn't know what it was that I was done with at the time. But I realized later, and the weeks and, you know, months ahead that followed, I realized I was done with trying so hard to control my life. For me, that was the burden. Eventually, it wore me down because we really don't have control, but I wanted to control. And eventually, that trying to do everything right just crushed me. And I think part of it was there were some aspects of my life that I didn't feel I was in control of, so I tried to overcompensate by being in control of others. But even more than that, I think it was fear, right? I think that's probably where all or most of us operate from, is that sense of fear. And we want to control because we don't want to be hurt, right? We want to control our relationships. We want to control our family. We want to control our friends. We want to control our circumstances because we don't want to be hurt. And anyway, eventually that, for me, that control just crushed me. The good thing was, I'm out of that rubble of what was my internal mess now, because I had lost all my whole sense of reference, like who I thought I was. This together person was all of a sudden wandering aimlessly a bit. It gave me space for something new to come forth. And so that's what the invitation is today, as we're talking about release, is where can we let those things go that are holding us back? For me, it was kind of a huge shift. I came out of it letting a lot of that sense of control go, letting fear go, letting the need to control others. You know, being gay is a huge, huge burden in this society for people. And it wasn't that I let all of that go, but I started to let go of that messaging, that hurtful messaging around all that. I started to set that down as well. Because without doing that, I recognized that I brought too many conditions to life, too many expectations to life, too many conditions to love, too many conditions, too many judgments and all of that. And I started to let all that go and get closer to just being in the moment and allowing things to be as they are, and then going forward from there instead of resisting, trying to push back and make them something different than they are. I want to talk for a minute about, like, one of our spiritual teachers, some of the spiritual gurus out there have to say about release. Thought I'd start with one of my favorites, Osho. I don't know if you know Osho, but he is was an Indian mystic guru, kind of a feisty prophet. He's a pretty feisty guy. I love Osho. And what I'm going to say about what he had to say about release, well, if you're a person who feels like forgetting is a bad thing, and you're always getting frustrated with yourself, like, I forgot. I'm always forgetting. That's how I am. I always forget. Well, Osho has a different take on it, so you probably feel good about this. So he says, one should be capable of forgetting things. This is far more important than the capacity to remember things. Remembrance is very ordinary. Forgetfulness is unique. And many people suffer from remembrance. I love that. Many people suffer from remembrance. Remembrance is like going on playing with your wounds so that you never allow them to heal. The healing comes through forgetfulness. Forgetfulness is healing. And until you can forget, and if you can forget the past, you are forgiving the past. So I thought that was pretty profound and remarkable. The Buddha taught enlightenment, as I'm sure we all know, is the end of suffering. Suffering has, is a worldly experience, right? It's an experience we create as opposed to physical pain. Suffering is more on the emotional or psychological level. And one of the main aspects of suffering is our attachments. So the Buddha taught as a key step on the path to enlightenment, or the end of suffering, is to release our attachments, which are our beliefs and our thoughts and our resentments and all that stuff that we're attached to, how things are supposed to be or how they're not supposed to be. So when we set those things down, we get closer to that end of suffering that those things can cause. Does it mean that we don't care any longer? Sometimes people get confused about that. When I've mentioned that to others, they think, well, what do you mean I'm not attached? Of course, I love these. These are my family. This is my spouse. These are my kids. I'm attached. I love them. It isn't about not loving. It's about not clinging, right? So it's not a question of not caring. It's a question of not clinging. And that clinging is what tends to cause suffering. Eckhart Tolle talks about it a little bit differently. He says, sometimes we feel like, I wish my life were different. I've been through, all these circumstances that I found so difficult, so challenging, and maybe I didn't like them very much. And can even be a tendency to feel a little bit victimized by life and our experiences. And Eckhart says, if you had not suffered as you have, there would be no depth to you as a human being. No humility, no compassion. Suffering cracks open that hard shell of the ego and allows that spirit to come through. He also says there comes a point when it has served its purpose. Suffering is necessary until you realize it's no longer necessary. So that's another way to think about all this. And also, I think it's a way of appreciating, as hard as it can be, because we've all been through things that we wish we had never been through, or things that we wish had never happened. It's a way of appreciating those experiences for what they did have to offer. And that's part of the practice I'd like us to talk about today, and maybe you can take with during the week. I'm calling this practice Bless and Release. Two aspects to this practice. Because first, we're going to bless life by expressing gratitude for all of those experiences, the good and the bad. And maybe you think of a particularly challenging experience or a relationship or something that you are still holding on to, that anger, that resentment, that feeling that maybe you've been wronged. And we're going to bless that. Just think about that. And just with gratitude, thank you for that opportunity for me to grow in this way. And not see it as a negative thing. We're going to bless it, and then we're going to release it. Thank you, and now I move on. That frees us up to be in the present moment, frees us from the past, gives us space for passion, for enthusiasm, for optimism, for creativity to express itself in our lives. Because it wants to, but it's not able to do that as long as we're covering it with this other stuff. That's how we make space for unconditional love. That's how we make space to express our full potential in the present moment. That Christ consciousness, the Christ presence that's within us, the Buddha nature that's within us, our true nature. That's how we allow that to come through us. We bless those experiences, we bless those things that are holding us back, and then we release them. Without judgment. It's never about judgment. That takes us backwards. We just bless and release. So, I think the first step in this bless and release practice that I would ask that you consider in the days ahead is to recognize what you're holding on to. And then examine what's holding you back from letting that go. Because, that can be tough. It can be really tough because we think we're right and we're not going to let anybody tell us we're not. So it's tough sometimes to let things go.
So that's a good thing in the Course in Miracles. Choose peace over needing to be right.
Choose peace over needing to be right.
Do you want to be right or do you want to be
I love that.
happy?
Both.
Choose peace over needing to be right. Right. Some of the lessons that I learned in that episode, what I call a major episode of release for me, coming out of it with some lessons learned, is getting along the lines of what I was just saying, is release is hard. It's hard. It seems like it shouldn't be, right? Because we're letting stuff go. We're putting stuff down. It should take the load off. It should be easier, but it's hard. It's hard because that's not how our ego mind works, right? Our ego mind wants to cling. It doesn't want to let go. So it is hard. It can be hard. It feels like it should be easy, but our minds tend to be clenched on these things. The other lesson that I learned is that it's necessary. We really can't move forward. We can hold on to things, but then it comes at a pretty great cost. We hold on at the expense of being available to the opportunities to know what else there is, and to, those things that are aspects of ourselves that are waiting to express themselves, that spiritual nature. We're missing the opportunity to allow that to happen. And then along those lines, release makes life better. It does. Our egoic mind can be very tricky and make us think that it's not. Oh, you don't want to let go of that. You don't want to let go of that. That's a trick of the mind. It's a trick of the mind. Release makes life better. It is really the doorway. It's the path to peace. It's the path to unconditional love. The only way to get there is through release of this other stuff. I knew, from my experience, that prior to release, without release, I brought too many conditions, as I was saying. Too many conditions to love, too many judgments, too many expectations get in the way of being fully present. Thinking again about this being our spiritual classroom, different components to how we might organize this talk this morning and what might be going on in your minds. I like to think of our spiritual practices as having three components. There's a learning component where we're taking in maybe some new information, some new perspectives, new insights. Then there's a practice part of it, which is essential. Really, that's how, we're all growing and learning through our own personal spiritual practice. And then there's reflection on that. And how did we do? And one of the things that we might wonder is, well, how do I know how I'm doing with my spiritual practice? One of the ways that I look at it is that I look at my feelings. How am I feeling? Because our feelings are manifestations of our thoughts. So if you're feeling something, there's some thought or thoughts underneath that feeling that are generating that feeling. So if I'm feeling angry, well, what are the thoughts that are producing that anger? If I'm feeling resentful or jealous, or whatever the case may be, those are signposts that we can learn from. That's part of our assessment in our spiritual practice. And again, not judging. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just for our awareness and reflection and growth, right? It's okay. It's all good. But how can we learn and grow from that? So that reflection is that awareness. I just just blanked on what I was saying. I know what it was. I was talking about feelings and using our feelings as signposts, right? If we're not sure. Or we can also look at our life. Well, what are we manifesting in our life? That's a pretty good indication of what we think about ourselves, what we think about our relationships, what we think about life. Look at what we're manifesting. It's a mirror. It's a mirror. Those relationships are a mirror too. And sometimes it's hard to take, because we're like, well, I didn't want this. I didn't create this. There might, well, maybe not intentionally, but there might be something there. There might be something there that we can learn from what we're seeing. So, again, I think this is a process. It's a lifelong practice. It's really interesting because it's a lifelong practice of manifesting or learning to manifest, learning to express what we already are. We've just forgotten. This really connects with what we talked about last week with that clay Buddha. It's not manifesting, it's manifesting something new, but it's already something within us. It's already what we are. It's just allowing that to come through us and discovering really what's always been there. And then it's been there waiting for us to take notice, to allow it to come forth. Thank you.